to the final panel of this wonderful festival, and thanks again to the organizers and all the volunteers, and all of you have made this festival. I mean, my gosh, I've just had such a great time. So I'm Jeanette Lynes, and I'm super honored to be moderating this panel on comedy, and I've been enjoying, these are 4 terrific books we're going to hear about today, and I've just so enjoyed, in living with them, inhabiting them for the last few months, and I really hope you have had a chance to pick these books up because they're just wonderful. Ali Hassan is Their Bacon in Heaven, Bob McDonald, The Future is Now, Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century by Kim Fu, and The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayr. So without further ado, I'll just frame the session very, very briefly, and we'll just get going into our conversation. So I was really happy when they asked me to moderate this, because this panel on comedy and humor, because goodness knows the last few years, wow, we could all use some cheering up. So I'm really been loving this, and these are 4 very different books. We've got a short story collection, we've got a memoir, we've got a nonfiction book, and we've got a novel. It's just been great. You're going to hear about such a broad range of things, ranging from solar power to vasectomies to teeth to weird, creepy dolls. So they're very, very different books. But I would say that all 4 books, what they do share is that they help us to imagine the world through a different lens or lenses. They build empathy. They all give us hope. They put smiles on my face, and I'm sure they do on yours. And I've learned a lot, too, about humor and comedy. I think about that a lot, and it's such a broad umbrella term. It's sort of elusive in a way, like really what is laughter, what is comedy, what is humor? And there's such a range. I mean, there's sort of whimsical humor when we read something, we kind of go, or we there's subtle, there's wit, there's wordplay, and then there's situational humor, there's funny as hell stories, and there's just gut laughing out loud, explosive laughing humor. So there's a total range here, and there's a kind of poignancy and as well. So there's so much emotional range in these books. You may have heard the authors read very, very briefly. Kim Fu has written 12 strange and wonderful dark tales. Ali Hassan has written a fabulous memoir about his journey of growing up Muslim in Canada. And really, it's a memoir that tells us, you know what, even if it seems wacky, pursue your passion. Bob McDonald's book on nonfiction brings hope to the climate crisis, and what could we do if we could only put our collective, imagination to work? We've done it before, we could do it again, so it brought so much hope. And Suzette Mayr's Giller Prize-winning novel is about a black queer sleeping car porter in 1929 on a cross-Canada junket. Without further ado, I've asked each author to just speak for a moment or two about what, I guess, humor, comedy, what that means to them as a writer, why it's important to them, and if they wanted to, how it figures in the writing. Like, I'm an English prof, so I'm always thinking about what's the craft, how does it, what literary devices are these writers using, kind of that I can steal myself. But anyway, I'm kind of leaving it open, and we'll just go down the row here, and then after that, I have some questions for everybody. I have a few individual questions, and then we can open it up. So maybe we'll just start right here with Bob about just generally humor, comedy, your writing.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming to this and then inviting me to be part of it. Comedy and science actually go together very well. Anthropologically speaking, comedy and laughter is something that bonds humans together. We're social animals, and when we laugh together, we bond. We share a good feeling together. And I noticed that a lot of you out there dye your hair gray like I do. And sometimes in science we have to deal with serious subjects, but you try to take a little humor in whenever you can. So for example, I had a senior couple over for dinner the other night, and after dinner the husband said, you know, we went to a really good restaurant the other night, you should check it out. And I said, sure, what's it called? He went, oh. He said, what's the name of that the flower that you give to somebody when you really like them, the red flower? I said, a rose? Then he turned to his wife and he said, Rose, what's the name of the restaurant we went to? Anyway, haha, see, feels good, doesn't it? So on Quirks and Quarks, we deal both with really serious subjects that we don't laugh about. I mean, if you're talking about COVID or terminal cancer or something like that, you got to stick with it and be serious and do the straight science. But we also try to mix our show up with lighter topics, and one of the most popular is animal sex. In fact, we did a whole book, a Quirks and Quarks book called Nasty, Brutish, and Short. Because animal sex is bizarre, especially in the insect world, where the male is often the loser. The males are very tiny compared to females, and they're basically just sperm bags. And once the female gets her sperm, he's food. So the males have to come up with strategies to try to not be eaten. And one of them, there's a group of insects. The male gives the female a gift, a little piece of food, you know, like the chocolates at Valentine's Day. And while she's eating the food, he does his business, and hopefully he finishes before she does. If not, there's another group, they wrap the food in a package of silk, so she has to unwrap the package, which takes a little longer, gives her more time to get away. And then the top of that hierarchy is a package that is so complex that by the time she opens it and finds out that it's empty, the male is long gone. So, I mean, you gotta laugh, right? It's just crazy. So we try to mix both. I think it's important that we do that. Comedy is a mirror that reflects society back on ourselves, and we need that. We need to laugh at ourselves once in a while. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Bob did ask in an email before the panel, like, am I allowed to tell a joke? And you just told about 12 right there.
I have more.
Thank you.
Don't
I'm
get
sure
me
you
started.
do.
Don't get me started.
Oh, thank you. Suzette.
I have nothing compared to that. I've got nothing. I guess, so with my work in general, I don't think that this book is particularly funny. If there are moments that are funny, it's kind of, you know, it's more off to the side. But I thought, okay, I'm going to look back at other books I've written and try to figure out what's funny here. Because what I think is funny isn't necessarily what other people think is funny. But what I notice often is that, you know, I think there's all kinds of humor. So there's Bob McDonald humor. Is that your name? Yeah. Sorry. And then Quirks and Quarks. I know you use the Quirks and Quarks guy. Quirks and Quarks. And then there's, like, you know, funny cats, like cats doing human things. That's really funny. But then I think I'm more like, you know, how sometimes humor is just the other side of pain, you know, where, so for example, you know, in my book, there's a sleeping car porter. He's very much an oppressed character. And what's funny for him and the other porters is making fun of the powerful passengers who have a lot of money. So giving them weird nicknames and, you know, that kind of thing. And I find that, and I figure that probably comes from my background as the daughter of an oncology nurse who had a very gallows humor, you know, so, and it's all about kind of survival and trying to just keep together psychologically. But I also think that humor is, you know, it's everywhere, it's all the time. It's unnatural to not have things that are funny, even in the saddest situations. You know, I'm sure people have been at, you know, funerals, for example, where people are laughing, and it's about coping and just trying to process information. So I'm just gonna stop there. I have no jokes. So there you go.
Give you one if you
Oh,
Thank you.
that was great, Suzette. Thank you. Kim, what would you like to say about humor
I'm
and
on
comedy?
Suzette's side of a lot of that. The kind of like voice-driven, like making sort of funny jokes and observations where like the narrative voice knows it's funny is always something I've struggled with. Very early in my career, I interned at this alt-weekly that had like this sort of very sarcastic, witty house style, and I found it so hard to write in this voice. And then really recently, this radio show I really liked, reached out and they asked me to write a short story, and the theme for that episode was humor, right? Like that one of the conditions is it has to be funny. And I said yes, because I like the show, and then immediately I was like, oh no, I'm not funny, like what am I gonna do? But when I was thinking about it, I realized that in a lot of my work, there's this other kind of humor where the characters don't know it's funny, where it comes from something being like so outrageous or so bizarre or so absurd that like when you hear these circumstances, there's like part of you just like can't do anything but laugh. Like there's like no other way to react to it. And for that commission, I ended up writing a story about a woman who so envies her neighbors that she steals their dog. and you know, it's like, that's not funny to any of the people involved, right? But there's something about her behavior that's like so audacious that it's just like, how can you not laugh? Another thing I was thinking about is yesterday in the signing line, someone was telling me that they drove here from Winnipeg and they got a flat tire. And you know, objectively, that just sucks, right? But that's like just a terrible thing to happen. But the way they told the story was funny. You know, they focused on details that made it funny. They, you know, about like, they considered it's like, can we just drive for 7 hours on the donut? And you know, and a mechanic was like, no. And you know, so they turned this like pain that they had gone through into like this moment of like pleasure and connection that like we shared together at the table. And I just think that's really sort of magical, and that's like one of the things that I think is great about, you know, about humor in the world.
Great, thank you, Kim. That was awesome. Thank you. And Ali, you've kind of got a real leg up on the comedy frontier. And what would you like to?
The three of you have talked about the benefit of comedy and you know, to the broader world, to society at large, which I'm sort of more can't help but if there's a conversation that's like 4 minutes long and there hasn't been something funny said, I start to panic inside. It's like I have no coping mechanisms or something. I don't know what it is. It suggests a very high level of immaturity, maybe. I don't know what it is, but I need levity. You know, I don't operate comfortably in very serious situations, and most of my life, I'm very, very fortunate. I feel that most of it is stuff that I like doing and has comedy involved, which is also why I struggle a lot to do my taxes. There's just nothing funny about taxes. They're late every year. I'm like, where's the funny here? There's no comedy. But I felt like what I wrote, there was no real way that it wouldn't be comedic. I think it would be suppressing something that I feel naturally to do to make it comedic. And even when I, you know, rereading pages, I'm like, oh, there's like a page and a half with no laughs here. And, you know, my editor had to be like, that's okay. You can just relax. Take it easy. It doesn't have to be, you know, rat-a-tat-tat. And so I've sort of, over time, I've come to terms with the different types and styles of comedy. Dark humor is something I always connected with, too. I'm on a show called Sort of. And if you've seen Reservation Dogs, it's a different type of humor. It's really low-key, and it's not broad. It's by no means slapstick, and I've gotten an appreciation for that. So I think, you know, just to reiterate what we heard, comedy comes in many different forms. But whatever form it comes in, I really do feel there's a huge benefit. And when you meet somebody who you do not connect with in a comedic way, that's a good indication that you should probably head in a different direction, right? It's a great way to sort of, you know, cull your, you know, or vet the people that you hang out with. You know, if I find myself, you know, a few minutes, a couple of jokes in, and there's no response, I'm like, well, this is going nowhere. You know, actually, that's not even true. I use it as a challenge more than anything. And actually, one of the most challenging people is one of Saskatchewan's own on CBC Radio, Garth. What's his last name? Materi. Okay, I've been calling him Materi. Maybe that's why I'm not getting the laughs. It's just occurring to me, mispronouncing this guy's name. I do what's called radio syndication for Canada Reads. So you go across the country, and I find it like very difficult to answer the same questions in the same way from St. John's to St. John to Quebec City. So by the time I'm in Saskatchewan, I'm getting loopy, and my goal is like, I've got to make Garth laugh. And we're going on 7 years without a laugh from Garth, so I'll keep trying. I'll keep trying. I can hear him rolling his eyes through the radio booth. It's tough. Anyway, what are you going to do? I like it. I like a tough customer. That's what my wife is too. It is. It's good. It's good to be challenged.
She's from Saskatchewan.
She's from Saskatoon also. What's with you people? What was that? I missed
Higher
it.
standards.
Higher standards. I've heard enough. I think. Thank you. There's no goal for me. I'm going to take my book and I'm going to.
Okay.
It's good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ali. And I'm going to take, that's a great tip, like how to curate your friends and like humor as a curatorial, what maybe calling, a curatorial device or a filter, that, that's very cool. I mean, thank you all very much. That's really set us up nicely. The other day when Angie Abdu did a wonderful interview with Suzette, please tell me if I'm like misquoting you now here, Suzette. I believe Suzette said something like, I just loved it, comedy is tragedy from a distance, something like that. And I've really been thinking about that a lot. And I know in Kim's stories, they are often quite humorous, a dark kind of noir kind of humor. The word grief appears surprisingly often in Kim's stories, and we'll talk more about that kind of negotiation a bit later. But this wonderful remark, comedy is tragedy from a distance, I wondered if any of you, this is just for anybody, wanted to kind of run with that at all. You've sort of been touching on it already.
Yeah, that Winnipeg story certainly speaks to that, right? The actual distance of driving and the distance from the incident itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're here now. That's why it could be funny.
Yeah.
They made it.
Yeah, if they were calling in from the ditch roadside, it would be pretty awful of us to be laughing at them right now. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that the nature kind of dinner party stories, which is it's something horrible that happened to you, but oh, does it make a great story, you know?
Yeah.
And then Ali won't kick you out of his dining room.
Yeah.
Or a doctor says to his patient, I have some bad news and some terrible news. He said, what's the bad news? Bad news, you've got a week to live. That's awful. What's the terrible news? I've been trying to call you for 6 days. Dark humor. But laughter and crying are very close. I mean, you can laugh till you cry, right?
Yeah.
So they're very close. They're the same thing, really.
Yeah. Everybody.
And isn't there, can I ask you, because the authority, isn't there some kind of condition too where if you feel an extreme emotion, you'll express the opposite? So if you're feeling super, super, super nervous, that's when you laugh, but it's like because you're
nervous laughter. It's a way of expressing. I mean, I think laughter and crying is part of our other language that we have beyond English or whatever language you speak. It's our body language. It's how we communicate with each other, and it's a very important part of that. So you're expressing your emotions, and if you're, I mean, we get nervous laughter all the time on Quirks. I'll get a scientist who is not used to speaking, and I'm sure you get this too, Ali. You get people that they're just, and we call it mic fright. And they're kind of, well, okay, I'll tell you about my new discovery. It's kind of a nervous laughter. Okay, take a breath and relax, and just talk to me. So,
And then they tell the story about the tiny sperm bag insect, and you're like, so there was a reason to laugh.
yes,
I
that's
guess.
right.
Yeah.
Or the duck. There's a duck species where the male has a penis that's shaped like a corkscrew, and the female it's called a cloaca, but her opening is also shaped like a corkscrew, but in the opposite direction. So the male has to really work hard to try to succeed, which is nature's way of saying that only the strongest will succeed. And what a stupid system. But it's real.
I'm visualizing a lot of spinning on top of each other. I don't know if anybody else.
Is it in? Is it in?
Oh wow, this is fun. These things can just go freewheeling in a number of different directions. I didn't think about insect sex, but I guess this is more of a question for the two fiction writers.
You're trying to be serious.
Never.
Talking about comedy never works.
Yeah.
You can't talk about comedy. You got to just do it. You got to be,
True, but actually, I'm going to riff off that just for anybody too. Before I have a few individual questions, like when you write, it's just it's just so hard. Like, maybe you can do it. I don't know. But if you sit down and you think, okay, now I'm going to be funny. I'm going to be funny. I've just done the worst writing, massive garbage ever. When I've tried, it doesn't seem to, the harder I try, the stupider and less funny I get. So I wondered how, you can't seem to program it. It's somehow, is it in the language? Or, I mean, I was going to say for the fiction writers, it seems to come through character a lot. But all of you, it comes through your language. And I know writers, they don't always like, I heard a writer this weekend say, oh, I hate when people say, what's your process? But I guess I'm kind of asking with humor, like, is there ways that you can flag that it's little pops, that it's sort of rolling in that kind of comedic direction? Or do you sit down and you think, God damn it, I'm going to be funny? Does anybody want to go with that one? Or no more bug sex, please.
Okay.
Just kidding. No, it's I'm learning a lot.
I don't know about the rest of you, but that's not how being funny works. Something will just strike you as funny, and so you write that. You don't say, okay, I'm going to be funny today. That's,
Yeah.
But it's a very common thing in the world of improv. You see instructors saying that all the time. Don't go for the funny. The funny will come. And that's, I like that advice as well, because the people who are trying and over-trying, it always comes across that way. And if you, in improv, you start a scene, and the scene, there's two people who ruin an improv scene. One is a person who tries to be too funny, and another one who tries to be too intense and comes in like, the house is on fire, and you have nowhere to go after that, right? You have, that's it. That's, yeah, well, I guess, or somebody who's sort of not accepting. Here's a plant, and they go, that's not a plant, that's a donut. You're like, all right, well, it's just my hands, and this, I mean, what, you could have just accepted it. So I like that world, that theory in improv, that don't never aim for the funny will just come. And then also you can take a look at the end and say, where can I inject some humor after the fact, rather than start with that idea. It's a lot of pressure sometimes, too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I'll circle back now. Like, I think this is maybe more of a question for fiction writers, but anybody can jump in and feel free to contradict or tell. You can tell insect jokes if you want to, Bob. But humor through situations, really weird situations in Kim's stories, and humor through character. Like for Suzette, the protagonist of The Sleeping Car Porter is just a wonder. He's one of my favorite characters in Canlit I've read for a long, long time. I love Baxter. Was he? Because it's always in his mind. We're with the word play and the language play and such a nimble, beautiful mind. Was Baxter always funny, Suzette, or as a character, did his sensibility grow where he was evolving into this? He's just got a great, often very funny consciousness that we see.
No, it took a really long time to actually find him. So for a long time, he was more of a kind of a stand-in, like a device, as in, I know I need to have a porter, he has to work on this train, I know that he's a gay man, I know that he wants to be a dentist. Like, that's all I knew. And it wasn't until I figured out that he has an extremely vivid imagination, and that's what gets him through the day, through the days and among the passengers. So the idea that, while a passenger is yelling at him because theoretically, because the passenger believes that Baxter spilled coffee on him, it was really important to be able to give him an out. And so what's the out? Well, it's him completely disassociating from that situation and not listening to what the passenger is saying, but looking inside the passenger's mouth and noticing, oh, he's got 7 cavities on this side, and his tongue is coated, and his uvula is a little bit distorted, whatever. And so I think that kind of defamiliarization and that his ability to detach himself from the situation and look at it as an outsider, that's what saves him. And the other angle that saves him is that, you know, he wants to be a dentist, but he also is in love with weird fiction, what they called weird fiction. So he's in love with, you know, horror and fantasy from the time. And by imagining that, you know, his passengers are actually vampires who he's putting to bed, it helps him get through the day. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. Like humor as a survival strategy seems to be a really recurring thread here. And Kim, like it's interesting with your stories because the situations are often very surreal or strange or bizarre. I mean, these are stories about monstrosity and otherness and. Sometimes the monster is the kind of a system of, a patriarchy or a system that pushes people to be just in normative directions, and stories are wonderfully subversive in that respect. And I was thinking about, I wonder if Kim goes in more through the kind of character or the situation. Like in your interview with Eleanor Wachtel, I loved how you described short stories as putting a puzzle together, and I see that almost like collages in your structure. So that creates a kind of a humor as well. So where would you say, is the core maybe of comedy or humor, or is it in the Gothic, or what would you like to tell us about that?
Something somebody else said to me yesterday is that they hadn't quite picked up the humor in my stories when they read it on the page, and then when they heard me read, at these events, then it's then they caught the humor, then they laughed. And I think some of that is not just the way I read it, but some of it I think was just being in a room full of people reacting to the story. Yesterday I was reading a story about a bug infestation, right? And there's and the bugs kind of increase, the infestation kind of increases in scale as the story goes on. There's just more and more and more bugs. And I feel like you could hear different people in the audience along the way, each hit a tipping point where where it had become too much for them, and then something just bubbles up and you laugh, right? And then once you hear someone laugh, it's it has this kind of ripple effect. And there's a way in which I feel I often don't know something is funny until I do that, until I read it, until I there people respond to it. And it is that kind of just I don't know how else to respond to this. And there are a lot of writers I love who work this way too, who it's very hard to explain why it's funny. It's not that the combination of words is so witty. It's just so extreme. There's yesterday I mentioned the writer Sayaka Murata, who I've been reading in translation from Japanese, and she has a lot of stories where someone is doing something wildly socially inappropriate, and that could be something small, they're wearing the wrong kind of sweater, or it can be something huge like cannibalism, and they get into the situations where they're with someone and they're well, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this thing I'm doing? And the other person can't articulate what's wrong with it, because they're just so overwhelmed by emotion. And the writing is so I mean, maybe this is just the translation, but it's so spare and flat, it's very, very matter of fact. And something about that is hilarious, right? Describing, ritualistic cannibalism in this very flat way. Well, there's another character just in the corner being what is happening? It's funny, right? And and some of it is just it's just such an extreme of emotion that I feel it's a relief to that kind of, to me, I feel it provides a kind of physical relief too.
But I read your book and I loved it, and I was how is she doing this? I want to steal it. But it was really, I think what you've got going is this, there's a terrible brutality and hyperbole, but it's juxtaposed with that kind of flat voice. And you also push it just a step too far, right? So that's kind of what makes it funny, even though it's the very first story about the person who wants to, just hang out with their dead mother again. I mean, that is profoundly sad, but the conversation they have, with the proctor, I think, to reproduce that moment. And the arguments that the grieving person has about, wait a second, so I'm not going to go into detail, but wait a second, so I can ride a unicorn, but I can't hang out in a garden with my dead mother, and it just kind of escalates and escalates and escalates until it's funny, even though it's terribly sad. And I think the same thing with the June bugs, where it's like, it's out of control. Like it's not just a regular infestation, it's, over the top. And it was very funny watching you talk to, there was somebody in the audience who said, yeah, thanks for that June bug story. You're paying my therapy bills. Like, that was pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing. That comes back to that thing I love about humor, right? Is this connection, this commiseration. I've gotten so many stories from people about, like, they worked in a gas station that was just like covered in June bugs all day and night, and every day they went to work and they would just stare at the gas station and covered in bugs. Like, here we go again. Or, I think it bonds people. Or right before this, Suzette and I were talking about both having our houses flood, right? And it's like, wasn't it funny we were going through it, but it's funny now, right?
Yeah.
In the detail, it's a way to connect people. I also think in writing, it's a way to sort of vary the emotional texture of a story as you're reading it. Like the story you mentioned, like a story about grief, could be very heavy to get through, start to finish, if there wasn't like a variation in the pacing and the tone and that sure, it helped the medicine go down, kind of, that I think humor can do very well.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I see that we went back to insects again, and from what I read, again, it might have been with an Eleanor Wachtel interview, like the bug story, the seeds of it happened in Saskatchewan, but maybe I shouldn't go anywhere with that. But you've really been enlightening because of literary devices and from craft, how do you make, and this sort of reversals, like just reversals and hyperbole, exaggeration. You both mentioned that. Ali, I found your humor just wonderfully self-effacing. Like often you're just really laughing at yourself. You're making fun of yourself, and does that
That's
just
not what I was going for at all. No, of course, yeah, no, that's very.
But seriously, I just so enjoyed like, kind of your persona. You really had this penchant to kind of just poke fun at yourself too, and also poke fun at a lot of tropes of Canadiana, like Tim Hortons and Blue Rodeo, and I loved all that as well. So maybe that was just a comment, a thought on tone. And Bob, in your book, your voice, your tone, your persona seems kind of a lot like what it is in real life, like very conversational. Like you address the reader a lot, you bring the reader into it, and you often will say like, imagine this, because some of these things like nuclear reactors and science things are really, really hard for a lot of people to wrap our heads around. And you use illustrations and examples, and they're often really, really funny. And you bring the reader in, and we're part of this problem. We become part of this problem solving, because you say, imagine if we could. So did you want to say anything about that?
No, that comes out of my working with kids. I began my career working at the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto, and so we were teaching kids about science, and kids love to laugh. They're natural comedians. And so you use humor as a tool to try to get a scientific concept across. So, for example, you want to talk about all the planets in the solar system. Well, you can try to get them to name them all, from Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Yeah, you can get them to do that, but that's not very exciting. But then you tell them about the planets. So one of them, Uranus, is very often mistakenly called Uranus. Well, that's part of your body. And Uranus happens to be blue-green because there's a lot of methane in the atmosphere, and methane comes out of your Uranus every once in a while. So think about it. There's a planet people call Uranus that probably smells like a giant fart. Kids love that. They love bathroom humor. So hopefully they'll go home and say, hey, Mom, Dad, there's a planet that smells like a fart. What? And then they'll look into that. What is it about methane? Why do we have methane? What's methane doing on there? How does methane turn light blue? Why is Uranus so different than Earth? Now they're learning about the planet, hopefully because of a joke. At least that's my dream, that they'll do that. So I think it's a very effective tool to try to make something memorable by making it funny.
So powerful, too. I mean, I don't know if anyone's read The Right to be Cold, Sila Wat Kluche. Very important book, thoroughly depressing. Not a fart joke to be had in the entire thing. Very, very serious, and I learned a lot from it, but very heavy on statistics, very heavy on a little bit of despair, too. And so, well, I haven't read your book yet, Bob, but I listen to Quirks and Quarks very, quite frequently. Your style is so, like I can listen to it with my kids, and not in anticipation of, but humor or anything, but just because
They don't let me
of your
do that.
delivery, an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and that's a group that's, it's imperative that they care about the environment like so much more than we do. They're into it. It's like a great delivery you have, I find.
Well, we take science very seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously.
Yeah.
So that's why we can every once in a while have a chuckle about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe this is a question for everybody too. I mean, through tradition, the tradition of humor and laughter, it goes back to satire too, and pointing out social ills, and it's for raising awareness as well. And I think all of your books do that in different important ways. And I wondered if you had thoughts about humor can be such a tool for social activism and just awareness raising, and racism in like at least several books is key, and embodiment and gender roles and how we try to pigeonhole those into normative ways, and the way we've messed up the climate. I mean, when I got the book but Bob wrote, I thought, oh, how's he this is going to be all doom, and it's going to be awful, and you're going to be depressed, but it wasn't that way at all. In fact, it was the opposite. So I wondered if anybody would like to comment on humor as a potential tool for activism or awareness raising, or even social change.
Isn't that what Thomas King said? He talked about how humor is the kind of sugar coating on a bitter pill.
Yeah.
And when you look at his books, for example, like they're very funny, but it's also, I mean, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think the thing to worry about is, if it's so funny, will people understand what it's actually saying, or is it okay to do that? And is it effective?
There's a boundary, right?
Yeah.
I think that when you're delivering the message, humor is such a valuable tool when you're delivering a message. But there is a prevailing sort of argument about the ineffectiveness of comedy and I hate to say this out loud, and I teach a class, I teach 2 classes on stand-up comedy, and I always have to deliver this to students, that comedy historically has not effected change. If it did, then you wouldn't have seen the rise of Donald Trump and Trumpism, because something like The Daily Show or whatever number of shows, Samantha Bee and Stephen Colbert, their mockery of things connected to Trumpism would have been so effective that we would have been like, oh, we're never going to vote for these people. So it's unfortunately not a huge driver for societal change as far as I can tell, and I'd love to be proven incorrect there. But as far as delivering messages to people that are important, I think comedy is so valuable.
Thank you. Was it, just a quick follow-up with Ali, how was the experience of like working in such an oral format, like stand-up, and then as a writing, was that much of a kind of a challenge, or was it enjoy it, or?
It was. I liked the writing, but the challenge was sending a story because it's a memoir and not a collection of stories, and that was the goal from the beginning. So I would send a story to my editor, and he would be like, great, I had a great laugh at this, why are you telling this story? And I was like, I don't understand the question. It's you just said it's funny, so I'm telling the story, and that I thought that was the end of it. And he was like, no, but what do you want people to take away from this? Why are you telling this story? Why is it important? And that would take me weeks sometimes to answer that question. And a few of the stories just didn't make it into the book because we didn't have a reason for why this story, why here, why now, what's the point of it in the broader scheme. And that's right. In stand-up comedy, you can literally just say, so I was walking here earlier today, and I saw this guy. And that's it. That's the only context. Everybody's on board. He was walking, saw a guy, and now he's going to tell us something funny about the guy. So that's kind of my training for many years in stand-up. And to turn that into what is the reason for this, I found that that was the most challenging thing about writing, probably.
Interesting, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
We won't have time for this, but if you get Ali's book on page, I think it's 112, there's a paragraph about halfway through the page. It's just a beautifully written paragraph. It could be like a manifesto for this whole panel, and I wish we had time to read it, but I'm going to do maybe one more individual question and then open things up. Kim, you're also a poet, and I read a poem of yours online that I absolutely adored. I believe it's called "Let Us Change Bodies," and I could sort of feel like a similar kind of. It kind of vibed in this, similar to the stories for me. Is there any? I guess it's a genre question. It might be a silly question, but does humor? Does genre matter? Does humor work differently for you in poetry or fiction, or is that just kind of a ridiculous false distinction? And you can say it is if it is.
I feel like, now at this point, I do think about both of them as being kind of communicative arts in a certain way. Like, I no longer feel so much like I'm writing to express something or express myself. I feel like I'm writing something to connect with this imagined reader, right? And I feel like the humor feels important to me that way in both of them, where I think when I think about writing a poem, I think I imagine reading the poem. Like I imagine being at a reading and saying these words out loud and hearing people respond, and I think that in poetry that can take the form of laugh lines. There are points where I want people to laugh, and then I think in fiction it can take the form of a different kind of punchline, where it's I want a moment of such impact, kind of that I can feel the room a little bit. Something I was thinking about with stand-up comics is I've noticed that I feel like the pros would never pause for a laugh. You know what I mean? They just talk, and the laughs happen organically when they do. And sometimes if you hear a brand new stand-up comic, they will pause for a laugh, and if the laugh doesn't come, it's just devastating, right? It just kind of hurts to be there. And I think that the kind of writing I do, even though I am thinking about the audience reaction this way, and I am trying to keep the reader in mind all the time, I also feel like it kind of has to work whether they laugh or not, I guess. And it has to. I hope that things work on lots of levels, or if one person laughs and no one else in the room does, that it still kind of works on some other level. I don't know. I feel like I learned so much from I feel like I'm primarily a fiction writer now, but I learned so much from poetry that translates into writing fiction, where the way you look at the world as a poet, and the way you look at details, and the way you think about language, and the way you try to come up with new precise ways to describe things, that if they're new enough, if they're a strange enough comparison, it will be funny, kind of that it will kind of provoke that response anyway. I feel like that's the role that poetry plays now for me.
Thank you. And Suzette, you made teeth so funny in your novel. Teeth, which when you think of the words that describe the cuspids and incisors and everything. But I want to just briefly touch on, I know we have to move on, but the ending of The Sleeping Car Porter, so beautiful. I would use the word joy after this trip from hell with all these, when people are traveling, they're awful. That resonated with me. I saw myself in some of those horrible, snotty, I want new bed sheets, and just awful. And then finally they're in Vancouver, and I think it's Ferdinand and Baxter go out into a park, and they fly a kite, and it just blew everything wide open after sort of claustrophobia and madness for day after day after day. Did you know the ending before? It's just such a moment of joy.
Yeah, I did know the ending before. I knew it. I think there were probably a number of people who were here before. When I was writing the book, I kept putting it off for different reasons, but one of the reasons was that I thought, this guy can't have a happy ending. It's 1929, he's a black man, he's a queer man. How can he possibly have a happy ending given the history of racism in Canada and North America, given, just the kind of dead end quality of this job? But And so it's like, I don't want to write another sad story about Black people. I don't want to write another sad story about queer people where somebody's punished, at the end, somebody dies or gets a boyfriend or whatever. Anyway, so I thought, I don't really want to write this book, and I was telling this to a friend of mine, Julia, and I said, yeah, I don't see any happy way for him. I don't see a happy ending. And she said, you're a fiction writer. Make it happen. And so I thought, okay, good point. So I thought, all right, what's the happiest ending I could possibly come up with that could still be historically accurate? And I figured, it's probably the happiness is going to be in those moments of freedom. So being able to finally get off the train and be in the park and run at full strength with your friend. Not even a romantic partner, but your friend, because friends are super important too. And once I figured out, okay, that's my ending, and I wrote those 2 paragraphs, then I thought, okay, how am I going to get there? And that was the process.
Wow, that's awesome. You're a fiction writer, make it happen. Yeah, no pressure, right? And just very briefly, Bob, I want to commend your use of simile and metaphor, because part of your wonderful ways that you can illustrate and make science accessible to the layperson has to do a lot with those devices. A nice metaphor: coal is a rock that burns, and a tokamak is a donut. So I learned lots of things. So I wanted to thank you for that. And now I think we're going to open things up to questions. I see all sorts of hands going up. What do we have, about 5 more minutes? Yeah. We could go on and on, but I guess we can't. But sir, you have a question.
Well, I'll go first, just so I can escape what the answer might be. But this is to Ali. I taught Garth materia grade 12.
What did you do to him? What did you do to that man?
I want to ask you, should I send him a post-grad report card?
That's the last thing he needs. He's achieved a great status. Everybody knows how his last name is pronounced here. He shows up for work at least every 7 years on the dot. He's there, and let's let him continue his life in peace. I think it's my own personal challenge to make that man laugh at some point. God willing.
Kind to me.
Yes, yeah, of course.
I see a hand up there in the second table. Yes.
So my question is, how do you, and I'm so sorry if it's comes out to be about process, but how do you trust yourself when you write something that's like, I think this is funny, but you're like, I am my worst critic. So how do you come up with that part of the process where it's like, you trust yourself that you are funny?
Is that for Suzette?
I have producers who tell me that, and editors that tell you that, because it's a delicate act. You can overestimate your own humor, think you're funnier than you really are. We all do that, so that's why we rely on producers and editors to keep us in line.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have a producer, but I have an editor, for sure. And the editor is the one who goes through and usually, as people have talked about, when I try to be funny, it's not funny. The funniness comes out in other ways, and so she's really great at pinpointing the parts that just aren't working. I think having that other eye, testing out the material. Hey, Ali, is that the language?
Yeah, that's the right language.
All right.
That's great lingo. Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen the yellow card go up or the red card yet, so okay, but it's a metaphorical yellow card. So maybe yes, we'll take one. Yes, that's just I was thinking, Amanda. Thank you. We'll take one more question, and I see a hand up right, pretty much in the middle.
Hi, this is just for whoever wants to take it. So you talked about the way humor just kind of can come unexpectedly in your own work, but outside of your own work, do you just have a memory of experiencing something where you thought it was really funny and no one else around you did?
Constantly. I have an unnaturally large capacity to remember bad jokes. I've often thought about what those brain cells could be doing otherwise. But it's for some people have music going through their heads all the time, but I'm triggered by things. And already just since sitting here, I've had about 10 jokes go through my head that I've held back.
Oh, thank God.
Because that's what happens, you know. Conversation will be going on, and I'll think, oh yeah, that reminds me of blah, 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 blah. And then everything comes to a grinding halt because I just killed the conversation. Yeah. So yeah, you got to be careful.
I was just kidding, by the way, about the bad jokes. I like bad jokes. And anyone want to have the last word? I see I think the metaphorical yellow and red card's going up now. Yeah, okay. Well, okay, so we have to wrap it up, and the poetry panel before us was just so nourishing and wonderful. And this group, my goodness, you guys are rock stars, and thank you so much for your responses and the gift of your books. And I've had a great time. I just hear all this laughter, it's like medicine. So let's give a hand for everybody.
I wanted to thank Jeanette also, who was sort of, thoroughly prepared for this. Weeks in advance, she was thinking about how to prepare and what to read, and as we can see, she was, dove deep into all our material. Yeah, she knows. I don't even know. I'm anxious to see page 112 in my book. But thank you, Jeanette. Just a nice round of applause for Jeanette. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll let you guys pack up here. We'll just let these guys pack up while we, oh, look at all these books. Do we get to keep these?
No, those are mine.
I thought of a joke. Should I tell it? Sure. Might not be funny. I don't have an editor. The mayor's not here, is he? I was going to say, what do Bob McDonald and the mayor of Moose Jaw have in common? An uncanny memory for really bad jokes. Crystal Froze is not allowed to tell the mayor I told that joke, okay? There were a lot of groans in the audience at our opening event this year.
Is it me first or you first?
Yeah, you're first. Go ahead.
Thank you. Once again, adjusting the mic. Thanks again for everyone coming. That was an amazing festival, 27 years this year. Thank you, everyone. Just because the summer festival is over doesn't mean you have to wait until next year to participate. The Saskatchewan Festival of Words has year-round programming, including our Performers Cafe mic the last Thursday of every month, except July and August, because we will be sleeping. And the Cineview film series starting up again in September. More programs will be announced in the coming months, so watch for details on those. And more in the festival newsletter, website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, as well as local news sources. We are everywhere. So now what you're all waiting for, let's do the draws for our raffle and door prizes.
Which one's first?
First is the raffle.
Raffle.
Who's the raffle?
Oh, here's the raffle.
Are you
Hold it up
pulling?
so I can't see. Let's see. Okay.
Oh, who is it? Oh, Glenda Julian.
I feel like the festival has a tradition of pulling our board chairs' names for raffles on the final day somehow. So that's for the sculpture, so we'll get that to you.
All right, so now for the individual session ticket evaluation forms for a small basket of books. That basket of books right at the end.
Okay. I don't know his name. This one.
That
See
one?
who that is. My magic trick.
Kirby Froze.
Oh, hey.
You wanna- All right, the next one is the wristband draw. That's that one. Oh, do you want me? I can do it. So the next one is for a medium basket of books, which is, I believe that one.
Is it wristband large? Oh, no, evaluation.
No, that one on the end. Oh,
You got
two
two.
step.
You got two. Yeah.
I'm making the choice. It's this one.
That's good. The other one was Glenda Julian.
Julie. Julie. All right, you're next. Okay, finally for the last basket of books for our evaluation forms. Susan Neal. It's your turn. You got to run fast.
Run on day 4 of the festival. My feet hurt too much to run today. So, congratulations to all the winners. We're excited to announce that the 2024 festival will feature Mountain Man Sid Marty, award-winning, I'm excited too. Award-winning author John Valiant, and if anybody knows how to say his last name properly, that would be helpful. We've been arguing about it for a few months in the office. An author with his very own fan club in Moose Jaw, Wabgishig Rice, will be coming back as well. So we're really excited to have them. Huge thanks to our funders, without which none of this would be possible. So Sask Arts, Canada Council for the Arts, Government of Canada, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, the City of Moose Jaw, and the Barry and Dee Dee Wigmore Foundation. And we also have a long list of program funders and sponsors that we're very thankful to. Thank you to our tireless volunteers. Thank you. Big round of applause. Including our highly dedicated and supportive board of directors. So Glenda Julian, Carrie Hennefant, Meredith Hagel, Jean McElrath, Angie Abdu, Shelley Rucker, and Ash Hennefant. We're also very thankful to our book supplier, McNally Robinson, and our tireless bookstore team, Susan Gardner and Nelson Reed. I'd like to thank Gwen Fisher, Siobhan Ruby, and the entire team at the Moose Jaw Public Library, as well as Jen McRory, Ross Malance, and Jennifer Ross and the team at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. We just take over their entire building and create chaos for days, so we appreciate them. Thank you. And last but not least, our festival staff. So summer interns, Yvain Lugren and Ali Zarubin. They're amazing. We have an incredible new admin assistant who's our newest full-time employee. She moved all the way from Winnipeg to work for the festival just for us, and we'd be lost without her. She just plugged right in, and she's been such a great part of the team. So I'd like to shout out to Sarah Jane Grimes. She's been amazing. And of course, we call her Amazing Amanda, our operations manager, not coordinator, manager, Amanda Farnell. So huge thank you to Amanda. I would also like to acknowledge that this is we've been up for some debate, but Amanda has actually been with the festival for 10 years. So 10 years ago, we hired an intern with a degree in statistics, and I kept talking to her about statistics, and she kept saying, but I love the arts, but I'm really interested in the arts. I love books and reading, and I really needed somebody to help me with statistics for grant reporting, and she couldn't understand why I kept talking to her about statistics. But 10 years ago, and she never left. She stayed on as a volunteer. We've joked that she's worked almost every position within the organization. So she's been our operations coordinator. She was the interim executive director when I was away for parental leave, and I'd be lost without her. So I'd like to give a big round of applause to Amanda. Here's to 10 more. 10 more. Cheers.
Sure. Ask me in a few days.
Yeah. So that's it for the 2023 festival. Hope to see you back here next year. Please book your hotel rooms and mark your calendars, July 18th to the 21st. Safe travels home.